Hi, I'm Joe Fetterman with Colliers Life Sciences Real Estate Advisors. And this morning we're here with Sam Woods Thomas, Director of Life Sciences and Biotechnology at the Commerce Department of Philadelphia. Sam, I'm so glad you could join us today.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I appreciate it.
And you know, there's so much we can talk about today, Sam, but as one of the people in the region charged with bringing companies to grow their science here in Philadelphia or do their manufacturing here in Philadelphia, I think this is a really unique opportunity to see what we're doing well, how we can do it better, and just talk about the cluster in general. So before we dive into all of that, how did you get into this this position?
Well, I grew up in just a small western suburb of Philadelphia called Pittsburgh, and I went to school there. Grew up there. I started my career there in community development, and I moved to Philadelphia in 2014 to work in the community of Kensington for the new Kensington Community Development Corporation, where I did commercial corridor management with small businesses, coffee shops, barbershops, small grocery stores, bodegas. And in 2017, I applied for a job with the City of Philadelphia, the Department of Commerce, in the Business Attraction and Retention Unit, where I worked on attraction projects across the spectrum, from manufacturing to sort of retail. And more my portfolio shifted towards the life sciences, to the point where I was promoted to the Director of Life Sciences in 2018. So the Department of Commerce, sort of as an intro course, is we handle everything to do with business in Philadelphia. We have people in our Office of Neighborhood Economic Development who do commercial corridor work. We fund CDCs, and to have people do the job that I used to have, which is go out and really reach out to small businesses and sort of sell and promote Philadelphia grants and resources. We have people in our Office of Economic Opportunity making sure women, minorities, and disabled people are able to have the same opportunities in Philadelphia that we all do. We've got our workforce staff who make sure that people are being trained and Philadelphians are getting jobs. And my unit, which is the Office of Attraction and Retention, we really work on attracting larger companies, retaining larger companies, making sure companies can grow. We have people who work in tech, the maker space is manufacturing, and I am the life science guy.
Well, Sam, that's a great segue. We just published our fall market report, Life Sciences market report for Philadelphia. And one of the things that we noted in that report was that there's a positive trajectory of investment in Philadelphia from venture capital and private equity, and also a positive trajectory in terms of the drug development and discovery that's going on in the region and the companies that are spinning out. So what you see a significant amount of is that the companies that are looking at Philadelphia as a place to come and grow and develop their business. I'm curious, as a trend, what's the dynamic there? Are we growing in that area as well?
Yeah, so I think you're right. The venture capital, what was it, 187% higher last year than it was the year before, something like that. I think NIH funding was $1.1 billion, which is huge. And that, I think all of that sort of is an indicator to companies and firms who are maybe outside of Philadelphia, that Philadelphia is a place to stay and grow. When I first started, we were doing a lot of work with sort of larger pharmaceutical companies, companies that are looking to, come into places like the Navy Yard to expand and bring on more staff. And also we were working a lot with sort of the homegrown Philadelphia sciences, the sort of incubation phase companies who are working at places like the Cambridge Innovation Center, trying to, get them to stay and grow here and try to help them find more real estate when they need it. But the most exciting thing to come in the last few years or the last 6 months, however you want to measure it, is the really big sort of groundbreaking firms that are looking at Philadelphia now as not an expansion or kind of a satellite location, but really as their main headquarters. And that's really exciting to us, because what that means is it means that, you know, companies are going to come here and they're going to want to manufacture, and they're going to want to grow, and they're going to want to invest in other companies. And at the end of the day, that means for us, jobs for regular Philadelphians, you know, on the manufacturing line and the lab tech side that, you know, don't require 16 years of college and, you know, all the PhDs. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, is that, you know, at the end of the day, we are about the big businesses, but we're also about the workforce development and making sure that everyone can benefit from this industry.
Sam, in addition to the companies that you just mentioned, I seem to recall you saying something about the CDMOs also, that there's been an uptick in the number of CDMOs that are looking at Philadelphia as a place to locate now, because they've picked up on the buzz as well. What can you say about that?
That's right. We are, what's happening in Philadelphia is really what happened to Portland once Portlandia came out. It's the only, not only the hipsters know about Philly anymore. So I think that the CDMOs that are looking for new clientele, looking for new technologies to work with, are really starting to look at Philadelphia as a viable and probably the next option. You know, if you look at what's going on in our University City cluster with all the companies that are in, you know, the Cambridge Innovation Center coming out of Penn, coming out of CHOP, what's going on in Pennovation with all the incubation space. For a CDMO, those companies are their future customers. And it's really, really reassuring and really heartening to see CDMOs looking at Philadelphia, because that means those companies are going to get to stay. Now, there's all these horror stories about all the scientists who had to flee Philly to go to Boston because that was where it all was. And I think that once you have that kind of next home for companies, it's going to be really, really impactful for who gets to stay here in Philly and who gets to grow.
Sam, one of the challenges that we're seeing on the real estate advisory side is that for the CDMOs, their trigger to have ready to go space is even quicker than the drug development companies, in part because of the amount of time that it takes for them to get up and going in terms of the build and the validation. And additionally, I'm imagining that they have corporate pressure to get their expansion up and running. How are you finding, you know, the availability of sites here in Philadelphia? Are we able to land these regional CDMO requirements? And if not, what do we need to do? Do we need to get ready to go sites that we can be prepared so that these companies can launch quickly here in Philly?
Yeah, the answer to both your questions is yes. We're ready to go for a CDMO or a larger manufacturing requirement in a lot of places. We could go to the Navy Yard. We could build out in Grace Ferry, in the Bartram's North and South parcels. But you're right. When a CDMO or a life science company needs to make a decision, and we see this over and over again, you know, they just maybe got their Series C, or they got their FDA approval, and they're like, oh my God, now we need to build out 100,000 square feet with 200 workers. That is a really quick trigger. And that requires it kind of requires that all that upstream work has already been done. That, you know, you've got the building, the shovels in the ground for a building. You've got sort of developers working, you've got sites, you've got all the infrastructure requirements, you know, already in the works. And I think that's where we can really improve is our institutions, our developers, the city, the state, or the Commonwealth, looking at this and saying, we need to get shovels in the ground now. And we need to have faith that these companies will come if we build, because there's nothing more frustrating than having and I know you guys have experienced this too, having a large CDMO or a company say, we want to be in Philadelphia. What's your timeline? And we say 2 years. And they say, well, our timeline is yesterday. And we end up missing out on the attraction. So really the next step in terms of development and institutional investment is to build a site and to rest on the faith that the company, once they see the site, will join us here.
You know, you mentioned the stakeholders that are involved in the life sciences community, the institutions, the Commonwealth, the city. and many of the leading drug development companies. It's an interesting conversation. What do you think all of those groups can do as a shared force, and what a force that is to actually advance and promote the Philadelphia cluster?
Well, I think we certainly do, and I think we're certainly a united front. But in terms of being a united front, you can always do better, and you don't have to look far to see best practices. I mean, if you look at my hometown of Pittsburgh, sort of their, really meteoric rise in the life sciences has been really fueled by institutions putting together agnostic, localized venture capital funding and building real estate that is not specifically meant for one company or the technology coming out of one company. It's also it's similar to the way that I look at our suburbs, is that we're not competing with our suburbs. We are in fact working with them, and I think that has to be the mindset for institutions, developers, scientists, is that we have to invest in our city, not just in our tech. And I think once we get out of that silo, it's going to be one of those come to Jesus moments where we're like, oh my God, this really works. The other thing that we have to do is we have to have foresight, and we have to think about this as being the next huge industry for Philadelphia. And I think you can look at Massachusetts with MassBio, with their really fantastic investment, I think of $500 million from, tax incentives and all that to the life sciences. And I think the proof is in the pudding when you look at how that ecosystem has really grown. And so I think it's things like that. I think it's getting better, looking at how we can be proactive, looking at how we as public officials, as governments, can get really creative in incentivizing companies to come to Philly.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Massachusetts. And it caused me to think about the recent acquisition by Roche of Spark Therapeutics. And, I think about that in the context of Biogen in Boston. It's somewhat of a watershed moment for us here in Philadelphia that contributes to, advances the cluster here, and probably has some fairly far-reaching opportunity for us. I'm curious how you're looking at that from your office and how that helps you promote the region. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so in a lot of ways, it was Spark that put us on the commercialization cell and gene therapy map. When they got their FDA approval, it was a watershed moment, not just for Philadelphia, but for cell and gene therapy internationally. So they've really been the leader in our growth. And, we are now ranked in the top 10 life science companies. We are known as a company where sort of technology and new treatments and new vaccines and new drugs come out of, a city. But we are not quite yet known for companies staying here and growing their manufacturing here. And I think the Spark acquisition by Roche is really the next step, the tip of the spear for companies in other regions and investors looking at Philadelphia as a place where a technology can be born, it can grow, and then it can make $4 billion. And I think that's, you can't overstate how important that is. And it's important for another reason, because Spark leadership is now working with other companies as mentors, saying, this is how it's done, this is how we did it. For example, Imvax, coming out of the Jefferson in the Curtis Center in our Old City neighborhood, has Spark leadership on their team. And it's just so important and vital that those mentors and those leaders stay here, which they are. So I think the roadmap is built, and I think more and more you're going to see Philadelphia companies exploding, and that's going to have ripple effects across the entire world.
Sam, that's a great point and a great segue. I've long thought that Philadelphia really is the indisputable number 3 cluster behind the Bay Area and Boston. It's not widely recognized as that today. I'd like to know what you think needs to happen so that not only in my mind or possibly your mind, but in everybody's mind, Philadelphia is the number third cluster and rising and gaining on the position that the Bay Area and Boston hold.
Yeah, I mean, you look at life science success sort of in these buckets. You look at real estate, venture capital, institutions, talent, and room to grow. And I think we're doing really well in all of those buckets. Obviously, we have the talent, we have the institutions, we've got the venture capital is growing, and the place where I think we can really improve and where there's a lot of room for a lot of potential is in the real estate sector. And it's that, like we talked about before, is when these companies look to move to a city, they look to move to a city with a facility that's ready for them, or a facility that is guaranteed to be ready for them. I really think that the companies want to be here. You know, any company we've lost from Philadelphia that I've talked to has said we really wanted to stay in Philly because Philly's where it's at. We didn't want to move to the suburbs. We didn't want to move to, Rhode Island. I'm sorry, North Carolina. But the infrastructure wasn't quite there. So if we want to take that next step and take our rightful place as the king of life sciences, we have to make sure that the infrastructure is there. We have to make sure that we're tackling the upstream problems before we end up losing large companies.
So Sam, if I hear you correctly, the 1.5 million square feet that are going to come online in the next 24 to 36 months is going to accelerate everything that's going on dramatically. And your ability to attract and retain companies is going to be enhanced significantly.
That's absolutely right. In 2018, I think we did a study that was, we were wondering, how much of our lab space is being used and how much do we have in the pipeline? Because we were talking anecdotally that we don't have a lot. And we were shocked to learn that 98.6% of our lab space was currently occupied, which is really exciting. But it's also just kind of scary. And the second that study came out, I referred to it as sort of milk out of the fridge. It started to go bad because more and more development was happening. And the developments that's happening is really exciting because it encompasses new construction, like we're seeing in University City. It encompasses sort of larger facilities that are being built out in places like the Navy Yard. And it also, perhaps most excitingly, encompasses sort of creative reuse of existing real estate or facilities or infrastructure. The prime example of that would be the Curtis Center, I think, out in Old City. And what that tells me is that Philadelphia has good bones and is ready for this sort of development. No shade on Boston, except to say that we are seeing companies looking at Philadelphia because there's no more room in Boston. And we have plenty of room here, and we are, light years more affordable than Boston, and our food's better. Okay, a little bit of shade on Boston, but I think that we have everything they do, and I think that we're more and more going to see the work and the hustle in Philadelphia start to pay off.
Well, Sam, that makes for an exciting 2 years ahead, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to enhance Philadelphia's success and to bring more companies into the area and to watch the companies that are growing continue to do so right here. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been good to be with you. We've enjoyed the conversation and look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you. I'd like to give my email address if anyone wants to talk to me, if that's possible. It's sam.woods. It's sam.woods.thomas@phila.gov. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Sam Woods Thomas.
So everyone, please reach out for Sam. He can be an incredible resource in terms of exploring possibilities here in the Philadelphia region. Thanks again, Sam.
Thank you.